Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is Aaron Wissner of Local Future. I'm here with Nicole Foss, and we are going to talk about the claims that people are taking money from Russia and China. And in particular, we're going to look at this claim that Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, is taking money from foreign countries. Well, Trump and Russia, you're explaining that it's Trump in Russia, but then we hear Trump explaining that no, it's not Trump in Russia, it's Biden in Russia. It's Joe's son, I guess, Hunter, and Russia and China, and it's does the President Trump, Donald, have any factual basis for that, or is that just smoke and mirrors or something?
It's disinformation coming out of Russia and Ukraine. Rudy Giuliani has been digging for dirt, and it's not real dirt that he's been digging for. They don't care whether the dirt is real or not. They just want to smear Joe Biden through his son. So they've been digging all over the place and talking to some of the most corrupt people out of Ukraine. So the prosecutor who was fired when Biden was vice president was called Viktor Shokin. He was one of the most corrupt people in the Ukrainian government at the time. He was refusing to prosecute corruption. This is why he was pressured to be removed from office. This was not something Joe Biden decided to do by himself. Everyone wanted this to happen. Everyone in the West, the entire US government, all of the EU, everyone who was involved in trying to help the Ukraine through its problems at that time was insisting that Viktor Shokin be removed. Joe Biden was actually trying to get Shokin to prosecute Burisma, which is the firm that his son was on the board for. Joe was trying to get them to prosecute his son's company. Shokin wouldn't do it because he was corrupt. Shokin was then fired. Lutsenko came in. He was also corrupt. Now they have Lishchenko, who you can pay attention to, but Rudy Giuliani has been over there talking to these corrupt people who were driven out of office, not by Joe Biden, but by the entire Western establishment at the time. Joe Biden was executing the will of that establishment. These were not his own ideas. Now, I think it was actually not a good idea at all for Hunter Biden to take that role. I think whatever he may or may not have done, it created an appearance that is unfortunate. I don't think there's any connection between his work and Joe Biden being vice president at the time, other than Hunter Biden got an advantage that he probably wouldn't have had otherwise. But that advantage flowed in that direction, not in the other direction. There was not an advantage that flowed from Hunter to Joe. If there was an advantage, it went the other way around. So this story about the hard drive has so many holes in it, you could drive a Mack truck through it. This is why no news associations, no outlets have carried this except the New York Post. The New York Post carried it, but they couldn't find an author to put their byline on it. They eventually put an author's byline on it without even asking them, and that author later objected. So this was a poorly sourced story that cannot be verified. The details as presented by Rudy Giuliani make no sense whatsoever. This is a hit piece. There's no way that hard drive was left at that company. And there's no way it was left, anything was left by Hunter Biden. This is a complete disinformation op. It is a psyop coming out of Russia and the Ukraine, particularly the Ukraine. It's engineered by Rudy Giuliani, Dmytro Firtash, who's a Ukrainian oligarch, Victoria Tunsing, and Joe DeGeneva, who are lawyers for both Giuliani and Firtash, various other oligarchs from the Ukraine as well, various other corrupt Americans. But this is a story that should be absolutely ignored. It should have no bearing on the election. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden whatsoever. Yes, he had a son who was an addict at one point in his life. This is a child who was in a car when his mother and sister died in a horrific accident and he survived. He has survivor guilt. He also survived his older brother dying of a brain tumor. He's Joe Biden's last surviving child. He's had more psychological pressure on him than just about anybody else would have done in his life. He didn't always handle it terribly well. Could any of the rest of us guarantee we would have done any better under those circumstances? I don't think we can say that. And in any case, this is the son's problem. These are not his father's problems. None of the things that are coming out about Hunter Biden have any relevance to whether or not Joe Biden should be or could be president of the United States. This is just Trump trying a cynical, pathologically lying October surprise. He's trying to engineer the same kind of victory that he did last time over Hillary Clinton. And last time, he managed to force James Comey to come out right before the election and announce an investigation. This time, he's trying to get an investigation into Joe Biden. It's not working. Now, he asked Russia and Ukraine for dirt on Joe Biden. He made it clear he didn't even care if it was real. And he was going to hold American military investment over Ukraine's heads for them to produce fake dirt on Joe Biden. So this is in the Constitution. This was solicitation of a bribe. This was unconstitutional. This is impeachable conduct. That is why he was impeached. He absolutely should have been convicted over that. He was clearly guilty, but the Republicans enabling him voted to acquit him, even although they knew perfectly well he was guilty. They are all enablers. All of them should be defeated. Not one of them understands the rule of law or has any core values to speak of whatsoever. Not one of them deserves to be reelected. If you would like to vote conservative, by all means vote for people from the Lincoln Project, because these are people who have managed to have the courage to stand up against their own tribe, their own party. And Republicans are more tribal in general than Democrats are. Standing up against your own party is an enormous deal for these people. They did it because they had integrity, because they did have core values, and they weren't prepared to allow those values to be absolutely steamrollered in the search for raw power above all else. They were not prepared to say the end justifies the means. So you can find conservatives to vote for if you're minded to vote conservative. But voting for the current Republican Party is not a vote for conservatism. They are not conservative. They are authoritarian. And they are getting closer to totalitarianism every single day. If they get a second term, they are going to make the payroll tax cut permanent. They will therefore bankrupt Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security by 2023 before you get a chance to vote again. Do you really want to lose all those entitlements? People have paid for those. Those will be gone before the next election. Pensions will be gone. Think long and hard before people vote in this election, because this is absolutely critical. There are multiple foreign countries that are intervening on behalf of Trump. That would be certainly Russia, the Ukraine, not everyone in the Ukraine, not the official Ukrainian government, but Ukrainian oligarchs, absolutely. Israel, UAE, Saudi Arabia, China, Turkey, every one of these countries is intervening on behalf of Donald Trump. They are trying to ensure his victory. The reason they are doing this is not because they like him. They're doing it because they know they can manipulate him and they can bribe him, and therefore they can get whatever they want, because they know Trump will give them what they want in exchange for a bribe, even if it is absolutely not in the interests of Americans. Because Donald Trump does not care about the interests of Americans. This is the one way in which he is distinct from fascists. Fascists tend to identify with the country that they are leading, and they want the country to be glorified. Trump will pay lip service to that, but he doesn't care what happens to the country. What he cares about is what happens to him and other rich people like him. So he's not going to be a fascist leader in the form of previous fascist leaders. He's going to do very much what happened in the Soviet Union when it collapsed. The civil service, the nomenclatura, they were well connected. They basically took possession of all the assets of the state while there was nobody in a position to do anything about it. So for the sake of pennies on the ruble, so to speak, they obtained privately all the assets of the previous Soviet state. This is exactly what Trump is going to do. He's going to asset strip the states. He's going to sell it all off for pennies on the dollar. You will be tenants in your own country, exactly the way Russians currently are. And in other countries, this is happening as well. This is what happens when you reach the end of the line and the rich people who are in a position to grab everything that's still worth having do exactly that. And then they say, possession is 9/10 of the law. You and whose army are going to do anything about it? So this is really what this election is about at the moment. Is the US going to allow that to continue as it currently is? Or are they going to put a stop to it, or at least temporarily put a stop to it? I tend to think of this election as a bit of a stay of execution, in that it's not a question of vote for Joe Biden and somehow everything will go back to normal and be fine. It absolutely won't. So you can vote for Trump and it will go to hell the very day after the election, if it hasn't done already, by your definition. Or you can vote for Biden and watch him struggle desperately while the Republicans throw up every roadblock they possibly can in his way, while they suddenly get religion about fiscal responsibility after giving unaccountable trillions of dollars to their rich friends while they're in power. They are going to try to prevent every form of stimulus they possibly can, because this involves giving money to ordinary people, and that's not what they're in the business of doing. So Joe Biden is going to be trying to fix everything that is comprehensively broken. The scale of the unmet need by November will be absolutely massive. It already is. They should have signed a new stimulus bill a long time ago. They didn't, because they wanted to leave the biggest possible mess for Joe Biden to have to fix after the election. So Trump reckoned there was nothing in it for him to pass a stimulus bill now. It was in his political interest more to create an obstacle for Biden than to help ordinary people at the time when they needed it. But this is going to be a huge problem. Joe Biden, if he wins, is going to end up in a position where he's dealing with an economic depression, massive unemployment, a huge spike of COVID that Trump has facilitated with his rallies. He is actively spreading this virus, deliberately spreading this virus, using his own supporters as vectors for doing that, again, in order to create the worst possible situation for Joe Biden if he wins. And you would think, well, but what if Trump wins? Then he'll have to deal with all of this. But if Trump wins, you'll never have another election. He will be totally unaccountable. He will not care what happens because he has no intention of dealing with it anyway. And if Americans have something to complain about with regard to that, he will simply repress them in the streets the way he has been doing with the Black Lives Matter protests. So he doesn't care if there's a mess after an election as long as he wins, because he will simply repress it. But if Biden wins, he will actually try to do something about it. And so Trump is creating the worst possible mess to try and create a situation where Biden is set up to fail, so that Trump and Trumpism, well, probably not Trump personally, because he'll probably be dead by then, the age that he is now and the state of his health, but Trumpism under another surrogate can come back in 2024. So Trump wants that to be Ivanka. Don Jr. wants it to be him. There are various other neo-fascists in the Republican Party who would like it to be them. I think it would be an absolute bloodbath over who actually gets that nomination in 2024. This is why I think of it as a stay of execution, because it's not that you can suddenly get back to normal by electing Joe Biden. All you can get by electing Joe Biden is someone who will at least try to fix the problems that are facing America. Trump will not even try. Biden will try. He will probably fail. At least by most people's definitions, he will not be able to deliver what people are looking for, because people want life to go back to normal, and that is no longer an option. Realistically, it just isn't. Normality is over. There is a new normal. So the question is, can people learn to accept the new normal as the best that any human being could conceivably have delivered? Human beings are not good at that. For instance, in Iceland, when they threw out the corrupt government that had delivered them into bankers' hell, they elected a progressive government, but that government couldn't restore normality in 4 years, so they were voted out and the corrupt people got back in again. This is very much the way things work, unfortunately. Human beings have a short attention span. They tend to think whatever happened is the fault or to the credit of whoever was in power at the time, even if that's absolutely not true. So if Joe Biden fails by people's definition, they almost certainly will blame him for it, even although that would be grossly unfair. I think the best the US can do is vote for someone who will at least try to help. Even although they won't be able to get things back to the way they were, it will be better than the alternative. The alternative is basically fascism from the get-go, and you will never have another election. You will have a dictator for life or a succession of dictators for life from the Trump family. They will be horrendously corrupt. They will do nothing whatsoever for ordinary people. They will steal from you comprehensively. Their idea of the way to run a country is basically human farming. They want to get more out of you than you're going to get. All systems, to some extent, work that way, but the system that the Trumpists would put in place will steal everything that isn't nailed down. And you will not recognize your country in 4 years' time. I mean, already, if you look at the states now and you try to put yourself in the mindset you had 4 years ago, you probably already don't recognize your own country. And it's going to get exponentially worse from here if Trump wins this election. And even if he doesn't win it, he is going to steal it. He's still going to try and steal it. And the way he's going to do that is by creating such an enormous amount of chaos around the election. He will take out lawsuits against mail-in votes to try and have them discounted everywhere he possibly can. He's trying to make it that no one can get to 270 in the Electoral College. He will then throw it to SCOTUS. SCOTUS will probably say, this is a political decision. We will therefore hand it to Congress. In Congress, you get one vote per state delegation. There are more Republican state delegations than there are Democrat ones. Under that circumstance, he will win, and he will do it legally. Not according to the spirit of the law, but according to the letter of the law. If he can pull off a legal victory, even in such a grotesque way, the military will probably support him because it will be legal, and that's all they really care about. A legal fig leaf will be enough for the military to still regard him as the commander-in-chief. So he is absolutely planning to steal this election. He knows he's heading for an electoral loss. The reason he's confident is because he knows he can steal it anyway. So if Joe Biden does not get 270 in the Electoral College, then this is the scenario. So it's not just that Biden has to win, he has to win in a landslide. National polls are not good at indicating that because you don't really have one election, you have 50 different elections conducted by 50 different sets of rules. And there's voter suppression and legal cases going on in every state that matters at the moment, trying to get postal votes thrown out. The other thing that Trump is trying to do in order to bolster his case to get postal votes thrown out, he is calling on his own supporters to commit electoral fraud. He's then going to say, there was electoral fraud, therefore we must get the postal votes thrown out. So even although he is creating electoral fraud, he is going to say that this is a reason to discount the votes and go straight to Congress. The other aspect that people need to be aware of is the various states, that swing states, could simply decide to ignore the vote completely and appoint their own raft of electors to support Trump. They've already said in Pennsylvania that they are considering this. They could say, we don't care who voted for who in Pennsylvania. We are appointing a board of electors who will go and vote for Trump. They can do that. Almost all the swing states have Republican legislatures. Most of them have Republican governors as well. They have every reason to try to do this. And they could. And once again, that would be legal. So there are ways that he can steal this election legally. I fully expect him to do this. The question is, who will back him and will it stand? If he is backed by the powers that be, the donor class, Congress, if people accept the vote, then he will have won and that will be it. If people do not back him in sufficient numbers, then maybe there will be a challenge. But it wouldn't surprise me if every single day between November 4th and January 20th was a complete shit show, because there are going to be fights absolutely everywhere, legal fights, street fights, you name it. It's just going to be awful for the rest of this year. And that's going to be against the backdrop of a massive COVID outbreak that is just spreading all over the place. So Trump has done people a world of hurt with his approach to COVID. I'm Superman. Oh, I've got over this. It's nothing. And people are dying of this. Not just old people, not just sick people. People are dying of this. And not just dying, but getting chronically ill and having their lives ruined over it. And he is encouraging the spread of this. So I can send you links for people who, for instance, could make a slam dunk case against Donald Trump for 100,000 cases of second-degree murder or negligent homicide at the very, very least. This would be a slam dunk case against him legally. So you have a president who is personally responsible for over 100,000 deaths of your fellow countrymen through his absolute failure to deal with this pandemic. They have now said they're not even going to try. They're just going to try and develop vaccines, try and come up with therapeutics. They are going to do nothing whatsoever to prevent people from catching this disease. In fact, they are, in going for herd immunity, they are trying to force everyone to catch this disease as quickly as possible. This is going to leave hundreds of thousands of people with the equivalent of chronic fatigue syndrome or autoimmune disease. Horrible conditions that mean that they will not be able to work again. They will also have pre-existing conditions. He is going to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 20 million people will no longer have coverage, and many, many more people will now have pre-existing conditions and will not be eligible for insurance coverage. Millions of people have lost their jobs and lost their health care coverage that way. A lot more people would therefore be looking for health care on the exchanges because they no longer have employer health care. They're not going to get it. They now have pre-existing conditions. This is going to be awful. I have been doing everything I can to wake Americans up over the last 4 years to the state of this man's pathology, to what he is doing, how he is doing it, why he is doing it, where it goes from here. But I find it very, very difficult to get through to people just how different this election is from every other election you've ever had. People say to me, why weren't you jumping up and down when at other elections? Or why weren't you, criticizing other presidents to the same extent? And I would say every other president has been a fundamentally normal human being. They're flawed. All of them are flawed. Nobody's perfect. Some of them have been absolutely awful. They've made terrible decisions. But fundamentally, they were normal human beings who behaved within a framework of law and convention. Trump is not that person. Trump is a person who is not a normal human being. He is a profoundly damaged human being with no conscience and no empathy. He would regard mass murder as the same emotionally as blowing his nose. It makes no difference to people who have no conscience. He does not care about other people. He does not care about pain and suffering other than to enjoy it, which he does. You can actually tell that he enjoys other people's pain and suffering. So I am jumping up and down to try and communicate this because this is the one time when it genuinely does matter. If you want to even try and save your country, this is what you have to do. It's not enough, but it's a start. And if people don't take at least that first step, then they will be saying goodbye to their country as they know it as of November 4th. And I love America. I've spent a lot of time there. I'm not American, never have been, but I've spent a lot of time in America, and I have tons of American friends, and I do not wish to see people suffer. And I do not want to see a psychopath with his finger on the nuclear button who might harm not just Americans, but almost anybody, anywhere in the world, on a complete whim. Because he could push that button and 5 minutes later there will be nuclear bombs flying somewhere, because there really isn't the capacity for people to intervene. So you have someone who's in a position to do this, who has a fetish over violence and death and suffering and nuclear weapons. And does this sound like a good situation to anyone? I like to think not. So this is really why I'm trying to communicate what I'm doing, and why I've been following all these people and trying my best to put together the most comprehensive story of where the US is, why and how, and where it's going, and who to follow to find out the information and what you can do about it. This has been my job for the last 4 years. So this is very much what I'm trying to communicate.
Thank you very much for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about Nicole and Nicole's thoughts, there are many videos on the Local Future channel with Nicole. We've been chatting since early 2020 about everything that's going on in the world, especially in the United States. Also, we have recently recorded and uploaded a couple videos on how to make the most awesome Twitter feed by putting in all sorts of interesting Twitter contacts. Thank you so much for joining. Please like, subscribe, ring the bell, and do all those things, and we will see you next time.